Well, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. How are you, everyone? Welcome back to the course. And in today's lesson, we're going to talk about an introduction to English teaching media. We're going to talk about the basics theory about teaching media. What is teaching media? What are the important characteristics that we need to pay attention before developing the teaching media, and how to develop the teaching media, right? So we need to have this kind of basic ground theory in order for you to understand how to develop the teaching media at the end, and what is the goal, what is the aim of the teaching media, and how to develop the teaching media in order to make this teaching media fit to the student learner need, for example. So that is the thing that we are going to discuss uh, in this meeting, right? So what is teaching media? It is important for everyone to understand this before stepping further on developing the teaching media. We need to understand, we need to know what is teaching media, and whatever that we understand as teaching media as a whole theory, for example, as a general theory, right? So the best explanation that I can found and that I can uh, provide is this: physical and non-physical device that aim to facilitate teaching or learning process to help teacher present the lesson more clearly and interesting to be followed by student, right? So it is a physical and non-physical device, right? Let's talk about physical first. Physical device is something that we can see, something that we can touch as a solid material. For example, uh, if I use this pen, this is solid, I can touch and I can see. This pen also help me to facilitate me as a teacher to teach the students. So whenever I use this pen, it could make my students uh, understand better and feel that the class is more interesting compared to the situation where I don't use this pen, for example. So that is the reasons why this pen is also called a teaching media. So teaching media have a lot of variation, right? So there are hundreds and countless of teaching media that you can create, that you can use and you can develop, right? So in a physical device, everything that you can see, that everything that you can touch is a physical device. Whenever you use this device, for example, in order to help the teacher, and in order to help the teacher present the lesson better, and in order to help the students understand the lesson better and feel more interesting to follow the lesson, for example. So that's what we call a teaching media, right? Okay. But um, years ago, or few years ago, before the trend of the online teaching media, so every teaching media should be in form of physical device, right? But right now there is such a development of the technology and the development of the theory itself that is um, so the expert says that teaching media is no longer limited to the physical device only. So there are also non-physical devices that can be used by the teacher in order to help them to facilitate the teaching and learning process, right? So take a look at the trend right now. We are using the technology. We cannot touch the technology, but we can see the existence of the technology. So the existence of this cloud server that can be used to share many things in form of internet connection, for example, or internet of in term of software development, for example. So that's what we call non-physical device. So non-physical device is a device that we can see, but we cannot feel it uh, as a solid material. For example, uh, in this trend of the uh, distant learning, for example, Zoom, Google Meet, Google Form, Google Classroom, for example, right? So everything that is related to this kind of to facilitate this teaching and learning, even though that we cannot touch it as a solid material, that we still consider this as teaching media, right? Because it is a teaching media that is non-physical device, right? So take a look at Zoom meeting, for example, right? So Zoom meeting is a non-physical device, right? Whenever we use that for like for teaching and learning process, so the purpose of using Zoom is to facilitate the teaching and learning process, right? Right. Because without Zoom, we cannot meet online, for example. That's why Zoom considered as a teaching media, because Zoom used to facilitate the teaching and learning process and to help the teacher present the lesson more clearly, and also help the student to feel that this class is more interesting compared to the situation where we don't use Zoom meeting application, for example, right? So that is why teaching media is very important, and those are physical and non-physical devices of teaching media that we can um, that we can't identify so far, right? There are countless of physical and non-physical device, right? Even though that this is not specifically created for teaching and learning process, the moment we can use that for teaching and learning process, then it's still considered as a teaching media, right? So for example, um, okay, for example, okay, this flower, right? This flower is not specifically created for teaching and learning process, right? It is created to decorate your house, your house and your room, for example, and or your desk, for example. So this picture is not teaching media, right? But whenever you use that for teaching and learning process, for example, in this situation, like me using this to analyze, to to you know to characterize what is teaching media, for example, then I use this in my teaching and learning process in order to make you understand better. So this is called teaching media. Yeah, even though that this media is, or this tool is not created intentionally for uh, teaching and learning process, right? So like uh, what we call it, like whiteboard, this is specifically designed for teaching and media, for teaching and learning process. Yes, that's what we call teaching media. But even though that this is a tool that is not created for teaching media, for teaching and learning process, whenever we use that in teaching and learning process, we consider that as a teaching media, right? Okay. The aim and the goal is simple. It's the aim and the goal is to make the lessons clearly, more clearly, and to make it more interesting to the student, to be followed by the student, right? All right. So what are English teaching media in language classroom? I have provided uh, six example. This is not limited to the six example. There are as I told you, there are countless of teaching media in the language classroom, right? If you are still traditional, if you are still having a traditional class, then you probably use chalk, paper, right? PowerPoint, voice, picture, and teacher's gesture. So all those kind of teaching media uh, is facilitating the teacher to provide the lesson, or to show the lesson better, or and help the student to remember or to understand the concept better, right? For example, paper. Comparatively, if a teacher use paper and and a teacher do not use paper, for example, to show something, so the result is different, right? Okay, let us take the very simple teaching media here. teacher's gesture, right? The movement of hand, the mimicking, for example, this is a teacher gesture, right? So it's only a small difference between a teacher who use gesture and a teacher who do not use gesture, right? Okay. For example, when I say up and down, up and down, right? With gesture. And when I say up and down without gesture, right? The difference is very tiny, right? It is very slight different here. One use up and down, right? The other condition use no gesture, like up and down. But there is a huge impact in the student's understanding or in the student's uh, memory whenever we use up and down without gesture. So the difference is very tiny. It's very little difference between using gesture or not using gesture, but the impact is very huge. That is why teaching media is very important. Another example, whenever we teach the student, for example, in the narrative text, for example, right? The like telling the stories, for example, uh, whenever we use picture, it could help the students to understand better, right? And it could ease the teacher also to extend the lesson in a clearer manner. That is why the picture is also very important, right? But remember, not all the teaching media can be used at the same time, and not teaching media can be used in order to fit to our subject. If we are teaching, for example, the procedure text, so is the voice really important? Is the picture really important? Is the teacher's gesture is really important? That is the question that need to be answered by the teacher themselves, right? Okay. All right. So before developing the English teaching media, you guys will need to pay attention to students' expertise level, right? So what is expertise level? So student expertise level is the level of the student's um, English capability, right? So I have provided there here as an example 5 expertise level. Number one, it is the first, we call it beginner, intermediate, upper intermediate, advanced, and upper advanced. So beginner is like uh, a student who study English from the very basic. So we call it beginner. So in the more than beginner, we have intermediate, upper intermediate, advanced, and upper advanced. So upper advanced, probably the subject and the lesson could be more complex compared to the beginner, for example, right? So advanced have a more complex material compared to upper intermediate, for example, right? So it's like the stage. So it's like the stair, starting from the beginner, intermediate, upper intermediate, advanced, and upper advanced, right? So these 5 students at level expertise need to be paid as a crucial attention, as a crucial matter to before developing the teaching media, right? For example, if your students are beginner, if your students are beginner, then it is very important to provide the media in a beginner that fit to the beginner condition, right? For example, if you are creating a slide or PowerPoint, for example, for beginner student, so you need to provide a simple language, right? The language that uh, the language that could be easily understand by everyone, and use of the simplest, or not the simplest, like the easiest vocabulary for those people who are in a beginner. For intermediate, you need to more you need to advance, or you need to upgrade the level of the vocabulary, for example, right? So those are the things that you guys need to pay attention before developing the teaching media, right? All right. Number two, you need to pay attention to the type of skill, right? In English, right, or in English teaching media, or in English teaching and learning process, there are what we call like four skill, right? This skill uh, are mostly discussed, or are mostly considered as the general skill that need to be mastered by this by English student. Number one is speaking, writing, listening, and reading. Okay, so those four skills are the type of skill that need to consider as a goal of the English students, right? So there are some things that you need to understand in this skill. There are productive skill, there are receptive skill. So productive skill is the skill to produce something in English, right? Like speaking. You produce something in speaking. You speak something in speaking, right? Or writing. You write something, right? You are the one become the source of the skill, right? So you write something, you are the source of that skill, right? Whenever you write, so it become a productive skill because you produce that skill. And then there are two skills that we call as a receptive skill. So receptive skill is the skill to accept, right, the language. It can be like listening. People talking, then you listen, you receive, right? Whatever that person is saying, for example. Or reading, right? Reading is also perceptive skill because you receive the information inside of the book, for example, because this book is written by somebody else, or this book is written by someone else, for example, means that someone produced this language, and then you, in form of reading, receive that information. That's why we call it receptive skill, right? The things that you guys need to pay attention in this type of skill is you need to understand, use, or drill, right? So in this skill, for example, in speaking, it is important for anyone to master speaking skill without drilling, without using, or without understanding. So there are steps that you guys need to follow, like understand it first, use, drill. Understand, use, drill, right? Okay. In type of skill, right? Okay. So in the third uh, in the third point that we need to pay attention before developing the teaching media, specifically for the English teaching media, is a type of the system. What we see as a type of system is the information that we use together to be able to have a skill in English. For example, if someone want to speak, they need to master some things, right? In order to be able to speak in English. They need to master grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and register, for example, right? So those four elements become the supporting system in order to create in order to make the students have like a skill in English, right? For example, without grammar, it is hard to be able to speak, write in a good English, for example. Without vocabulary, it's hard to speak, to write, to listen, and to read in a good level, for example, right? And without good pronunciation, it's also going to have like difficulties in creating the skill, right? And also register. Without register, it's hard to read, it's hard to write, for example, right? So if you guys want to teach this one of type of the system, then use practice, right? So use practice, not drilling, right? For example, if you want the student to be able to master tenses, for example, in term of grammar, then use practice instead of drilling, or instead of uh, understanding, right? So if you practice it more, then people will start to understand the tenses better. If you try to use it drilling, for example, require them to memorize things in tenses, for example, okay, hafalkan 16 tenses, that's not gonna work, because this is type of the system, not the skill, right? So you cannot memorize, for example, or you cannot let them drill without practice. So practice is important. That is why it is also needs to be considered as one of the things that we need to pay attention before developing the English teaching media, right? Okay, right. The fourth item that we guys, as a teacher, you guys need to pay attention is a type of the learning styles of the learners, right? Remember, because the work of the teacher is to build someone's skills, to build someone characters, because it deal with human, then it must be unique, right? What is the uniqueness of the learners? Every learners have a different way of learning style, right? So we cannot generalize all the students in our class, for example, will like this. For example, if I show a video to one of my class in senior high school, for example, or in junior high school or in elementary school, I cannot assume myself that everyone will like this video, right? Why? Because there are different type of learner. Some of the students probably like to watch the videos, but some of the students prefer to read instead of watching a video, for example, or some of the students prefer to listen instead of showing the visuals, the visuality of the, the, the movie, for example, or the film or the video. So that is why, as a teacher, before developing the teaching and learning media, the teacher need to understand the type of the students learning style. All right, so what are those learning style? It Number one, we call it visual learner, right? So visual learner is the learning style of one students who prefer to see things instead of learning things, right? So for visual learner, it will be easy for them to understand, or to understand or master the concept whenever they see things, right? That people will like to have something to be visually presented instead of auditory or kinesthetic, right? So for these people, if you show the video, for example, that it will be easy for them to understand because they can see things, right? Or for this visual learner, it will be easier for them to understand if you show, or if you show the way how it works, for example, in front of them, right? Okay, so that is visual learner. Now, second is auditory learner. Auditory learner is the students that understand and learn best when the information is presented in auditory manner, like everything that related to hearing, right? whenever he hears something, whenever he listens something, for example, it will be easier for him or for her to understand instead of saying things, right? So these people or this auditory learner, if our students, some of our students, for example, or most of our students are auditory learner, so use voice, use sounds or anything that is related to auditory manner, like hearing information or hearing the explanation, in order to internalize the concept of thought, right? So I mean, like, they will easily understand better whenever he hears something, whenever he listen the subject, for example, right? So these are our auditory learners. Number three is kinesthetic learners. Some students understand and learn better whenever whenever the information or whenever the lesson is presented to them in kinesthetic manner. All right, so like everything that is related to how their kinesthetic move, right? So movement, these people cannot sit and listen. These people cannot sit and watch, right, and see things and then they understand. No, that's not gonna work, because the kinesthetic learners are the people, are the learner who really want to move, or like moving, right, in order trying by themselves. So many younger children are kinesthetic learners, so they prefer to run, jump here, jump there, to dance, for example, to move, um, in order to understand the concept better. So that is kinesthetic learner. If our students are kinesthetic learner, so do not ask them to watch, do not ask them to listen, because it's not gonna work. The kinesthetic learner really need a demonstration, right? Something that can make him or her move, something that can make him or her try in person, try that concept in person. That is why kinesthetic learners also need to be pay attention as one of the things before developing the teaching and learning media, right? Okay. Okay. Well, I think that is all for today's course. Um, in the next meeting, we're going to discuss about the characteristic of each learners, whether it's visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. What are the characteristics? How you as a teacher can identify your student. Oh, I know my student is visual. Okay, I know my student is auditory, or I know my student is kinesthetic, and why, right? So the characteristic of each student, how do you see them as visual learner, how do you see them as an auditory learner, how do you see them as kinesthetic learners? We're going to discuss that later. That's why I urge you to read before entering to the next meeting, right? So read everything that is related to the characteristic of each learners, and then we're going to discuss it later in the platform, in the teaching and learning media platform, right? So I think that is all for today's lesson. If you don't understand, or probably I speak too fast, then ask a question, right? Write something in the discussion panel that I have provided for you in Spada Internal BBG. So you guys need to be active and ask. If you don't understand, don't let it be skipped, right? Because it is your right to have a better understanding. If you still don't understand, or if you have a different concept or a different theoretical ground, uh, you can also like uh, tell it in the discussion panel. Or if you think that my understanding, or if you think that the lesson is not making any sense, you also may rebut that in the discussion panel, right? It is free to discuss, right? So you can say anything that is related to your understanding right now. If you still have, for example, if you project a situation that you don't understand how this concept could work, for example, then also need to you also may contact me in this discussion panel, right? So I think that is all for today's meeting, everyone. And thank you. And don't forget to ask a question if you still don't understand, or ask question if you have any thought, or you think that uh, the lesson that I extend is somehow irrelevant with your understanding. You are free to voice your voice, right? So I think that is all. Thank you and have a good day. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.